Morning, everyone, and welcome to this free webinar on what does business need from in-house counsel. This is the latest installment of our ESG series and part of our in-house lawyers 2025 program. A bit of housekeeping before we begin. If you have questions, please do pop them in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we should have some time to get to them at the end. We also have polls in this webinar, which is very exciting, so please do get involved. Next slide, please, Jordan. So agenda-wise, we'll be covering 4 key areas. I will kick us off and pull out some key ESG themes for this year and really what to look out for. And then Kirsten will cover expectations businesses have for legal input on ESG and net zero strategies. Iona will then walk us through a greenwashing case study featuring, spoiler alert, an increasingly influential regulator. And then last but not least, Ben, who is our Freeth's responsible business director, will talk us through lessons learned at Freeth's with a focus on our B Corp certification. Next slide. So first, who am I? So I'm Shreya Thapa. I'm the knowledge lawyer for the clean energy, waste and sustainability sector at Freeth's. So I help demystify and hopefully translate clean energy, but also sustainability related policy and regulation for a wide range of clients and practice areas at the firm. So I'm coming at this very much with that regulatory and policy perspective in mind. So that is kind of how we're approaching the themes. But before we get into it, I think it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge perhaps what is the elephant in the room and the kind of recent shift we've had in ESG, or the apparent recent shift we've had in ESG. So a few years ago, there was a big rush for sustainability commitments and ESG measures. And now it seems like we're in a different climate. There's rollbacks on D&I policies in the US. Oil majors are divesting their renewable energy portfolios and so on and so forth. And this is where I think sustainability policy and energy policy, actually, and I'm an energy lawyer by background, so a bit biased, but I think unlike many other areas of law, they do change and they do move quickly with political tides. But what I would say is that we can't avoid facing the climate change and biodiversity loss that is already underway, no matter the political current that we're in. And the sustainable business position for a business really of the present and of the future is to stick to adaptation, reduction and true transition plans. Yes, from a regulatory perspective, as we'll go on to, yes, from a reputation perspective and also for competitive advantage, but also because it is the physical reality we live in, and taking that into account is responsible business planning and is sensible risk management. So with that as our backdrop, a few themes to pull out for this year and moving forward. So I've got on here the Great Simplification, which is what I call the EU Omnibus, for those who are familiar with it, is the European Commission's proposal to harmonise and possibly simplify the 3 main pillars of EU ESG regulation. So CSRD, which is focused on reporting standards, CSDDD, which is focused on corporate responsibility and due diligence, and the EU taxonomy, which is focused on classifying sustainable investments, and all of which affect companies inside and outside the EU. And what we mean by simplification really is well, at the moment, 2 things. So one is narrowing the scope of the companies that are affected, so focusing on large companies as opposed to small and medium-sized businesses. And the second is delaying the timelines for reporting. And at the time of pairing these slides, indeed, MEPs had agreed to stop the clock or delay timelines. So there's been a 2-year postponement of the next wave of CSRD reporting and 1 year for CSDDD. There hasn't been a reopening of the legislation yet, but one to watch over the next few months. And while I think some businesses will welcome this, all would probably agree that they don't enjoy how much the regulation seems to waver and fluctuate. And it's possible because a lot of this has phased implementation that it changes again closer to the time of implementation. And that uncertainty isn't helpful for businesses when it comes to reporting and their ESG strategy over the next few years. But our advice would really be that you can only really try and prepare for the highest standard in your jurisdiction. Hopefully you'll see that there are benefits of doing that beyond meeting compliance requirements. And also at the same time, regulation may be being delayed or possibly softening in the EU, but in other jurisdictions, and we'll be focusing on the UK today, climate litigation is on the rise, as are greenwashing standards. And in the UK, we have our own reporting standards as well, which are in the works, which brings me nicely to my next point, which is the UK SRS, the UK Sustainability Reporting Standards. There's a lot of acronyms here, so bear with me. So the UK SRS builds on the International Sustainability Standards Board's international standards, the ISSB standards, which, and those who are familiar with TCFD, that is the same body that is now responsible for TCFD reporting. And the UK SRS will very much replace and augment TCFD. The idea is that the UK will formally endorse its own domestic version of the standards probably by 2026. And we should have some exposure drafts this year. It was meant to be Q1, so it's probably been delayed somewhat, but with the exposure drafts, there should also be a consultation. But the idea in general is to stick to those international standards as closely as possible and kind of only deviate where necessary. And indeed, that's what's happened with Japan, who have recently published their final version of their standards last month. In terms of entities who need to be really following this, it will be entities who are already subject to TCFD reporting, so the larger companies, listed companies through the FCA, but possibly also more. We don't know the exact scope yet of UK SRS until we see those exposure drafts. What we do know is that it will require climate transition plans, and indeed the government, when it was in opposition last year, did have a manifesto pledge of introducing mandatory climate transition plans for companies and financial institutions. And what's actually helpful about going back to the EU regulation CSRD reporting is that although it's been delayed, we've had the first wave of reporting already, and with that we've had the first wave of climate transition plans. So all publicly available information, and so worth taking insights from that and really seeing what companies in similar industries are doing and planning in the years ahead. But moving on from the reporting side, I'm going to go a little bit more macro here. So I've got supply chains. So it's not just legal climate risks, as we know, but also physical climate risks are increasing. After all, climate change is a threat to physical commodities, and that is being coupled with a geopolitical environment where we're seeing countries, and not just the United States. This is happening before the recent trade war that we've been seeing escalate over the last couple of weeks. Countries have been becoming more inward and using tariffs to implement wider policy goals, with a focus on shortening supply chains. We can see this with the carbon border adjustment mechanisms coming into full force in the EU and then in the UK. And a clean energy example, actually. So this year, electricity generators who are participating in renewable energy auctions have to meet shorter and more sustainable supply chain requirements. There's a minimum standard, and then there's a bonus for going beyond that as well. And that is becoming more frequent in the UK as well as the EU. So similarly with sustainable aviation fuel, so there is now a revenue mechanism. So for sustainable aviation fuel that is produced in the UK, and I think we'll be seeing more of that especially as the UK government attempts to couple climate goals as well as growth goals. And so one to watch out for really when it comes to your supply chain procurement and sort of supply chain contracts in general. And then finally, a bit on AI, because there can't be a 2025 theme slide without mentioning AI. I think it's fair to say that we're seeing AI become more and more embedded into every business process. At the same time, AI has significant energy and water demands. And at the moment, it's fairly difficult to measure the emissions of AI and use it to really, I guess, inform what is a responsible use of it. And I think that's really the next frontier of environmental assessment, also the use of AI in recruitment, for example, and forthcoming talks about regulating AI. But that's probably a whole other webinar, so I will park that there for now. Finally, from me, a plug. If you want to keep in the know in a similar fashion about what's coming up next, we do produce a free 6-monthly sustainability horizon scanner. The next edition will be out in June, so please do get in touch with any of us if you would like to be on our mailing list for that. And with that, I will hand over to Kirsten.
Morning, everyone. Thank you, Jordan. So I wanted to start with talking about what is ESG, because it's not the same thing to every business. We have about 74 of you on this morning's webinar, and I imagine it means a different thing to every business that has joined this webinar. So a lot of businesses don't decide to focus on the E, the S and the G, or they just pick the bits that are important to them. So that's my start point. There isn't just one ESG. So when you're supporting your business in relation to ESG, it's not one size fits all. So for example, here at Freeths, we've decided to call it responsible business. Why? Which is why Ben, who's going to be speaking later, is our responsible business director, not our ESG director. Somebody that we used, a consultant we used last year actually to help us pull together our first responsible business report, said that ESG was old hat and nobody calls it that anymore. I'm not sure that's actually correct, but it will mean different things to different businesses. Next slide, please. I also wanted to mention that, picking up on what Sharia said about, we're living in a Trump world. Is everybody walking back from their sustainability commitments? Certainly when I speak to the private equity houses or the corporate finance businesses, they are all deeply now into ESG due diligence, whether or not they're investing by way of debt or they're looking at an equity position. So, I would suggest that no, most businesses aren't substantially walking back from net zero goals that they put in place on the net zero plan, because they can see that it makes business sense in the long term. In terms of what does your business need from you, therefore, I think the first thing to ask yourself is how involved do you want to be? So I've seen a lot of in-house lawyers who love compliance. They're becoming maybe the sustainability directors of their company. That's one end of the spectrum. At the other end of the spectrum, and I'm sure a lot of you will be there, you already have incredibly busy day jobs. I think a lot of us in private practice think, oh, if we leave and go in-house, we'll work shorter hours, and that's often not the case. So how on earth are you supposed to fit in sustainability obligation, responsibilities on top of all that? So there's that consideration. There's also, does sustainability rock your boat? How important is it to your business? But it might be something where you can use it to advance your career. It's always worth looking at those opportunities when you're in-house. But certainly I remember from my days in-house, it's a pretty busy job. You get pulled left, right, and centre as it is. I went in as a corporate lawyer and ended up running arbitrations. We're already really stretched. So one thing I would say that might give you some comfort is you're not supposed to have all the answers in relation to sustainability or the wider ESG picture. So Ben and I last week were interviewing sustainability managers for Freeths, and they all had an engineering background, not a legal background. So if you're looking at some of this stuff and thinking, I don't know where to start, that's okay. It's because as a lawyer, you bring lots of skills that are going to be really useful to your business, like logical thinking, gap analysis, ensuring that when people use a phrase like circular economy, everybody in the room is understanding the same thing by it. But equally, you're not supposed to have all the answers, so don't worry. But as I mentioned, lawyer skill sets do lend themselves to this. We do have a very valuable role to play. Next slide, please. What webinar is complete without a picture of a cowboy, or it might be a cowgirl. But the reason I put this one up there is there are some really exciting aspects of sustainability, and that is that it can be a bit Wild West, and it can give you the opportunity to make stuff up. How often in our lives as lawyers are we making stuff up? Normally we're just, rolling out the template from PLC, etc. I've had some real fun being the sustainability director at Freeths, and I'll give you a couple of examples. So I do a lot of work with the natural capital team, which is all biodiversity, net gain units, and phosphorus credits, and nitrate credits, and sand credits, all these ways in which the environment in this country is being monetized. When we started on our natural capital journey at Freeths about 3 years ago, and I work closely with the environment team and the planners, obviously, they asked me, can you create an agreement to sell a biodiversity net gain unit? And I had to absolutely go back to basics and dredge my memory to work out what were they? Because when you spoke to the planning lawyers, they hadn't actually formulated the idea that these things are assets. somewhere from the deepest depths of my memory, I dredged out from some university lecturer, and I won't tell you when, that their shows is in action. There's since been a Law Commission report which confirms that their shows is in action, and one day there'll be digital assets, but we probably need some legislation to get there. So it can be fun when you're sitting down with a literally blank piece of paper and thinking, what is it that we're doing in this sustainability world? You know, how do I help my clients, in my case, your business, in your case, do what they want to do, achieve the aims they want, when I have to sort of go back to basics and work out what we're doing in the first place. In a similar vein, we know of businesses that are entering into 100-year agreements with charities to create carbon credits. Firstly, you know, as a contracts lawyer, not often entering into a 100-year agreement, what on earth does that look like in terms of the parties' obligations as the years go by? Also, as businesses, often not dealing with NGOs in the charity sector. They've got, I mean, to say they've got a different culture, you know, is to understate it. So how do you make sure that each party is achieving their aims in a way in which they're comfortable? Again, a natural capital example. It blew my mind when I found out that I'm buying and selling BNG units for either the people who create them, or buying them for the housing developers or the retail outlets who need them to build their next store, or sometimes the brokers in the middle. The grass seeds that are planted might not take. So you are able to buy and sell something which never actually comes into existence, but there's enough of a framework around it for that to happen. But as I said, I mean, the first time I was told that, I was like, what do you mean the trees might not grow? Because we're so used to our certainties, and the sustainable world in which we now find ourselves doesn't always have certainties attached. And finally, I guess I wanted to mention collaboration, because again, another area where as lawyers you might feel a bit uncomfortable is that in this sustainable world, you know, the law firms might be working together, the supermarkets are definitely having to work together, because they can only enable their customers to make more sustainable choices if sustainability is the only choice in town. So a refill is a good example. You know, we've all got busy, complex lives, and actually, although we know we should take our container and go and buy our cornflakes and get in our own plastic container and get it filled, it's easier to grab one off the shelf, isn't it? So the supermarkets are working together to come up with refill options. And that's why the Competition and Markets Authority put out a practice note last year to say that competition law is relaxed to a degree if in order to promote sustainability amongst people who are competitors. So there's an article on the Freeze website about that if you want to check that out some more. Next slide, please. So again, where do you start with legal services? Where do you sit in all of this? Well, the obvious ones are compliance, working out what legislation is already in place, which is relevant to your business. And it's worth mentioning their EU legislation. Now, Shreya has said that, you know, there's been a big walk back from CSRD and CSRDDD, but it will come in some form or another. Even if you're a business that you think, well, we're a UK business, how, you know, Brexit. If you sell to EU customers, if you have subsidiaries in the EU, or even if you have shareholders in the EU, you will find yourselves indirectly dragged into EU-based ESG reporting. So you will need to know about it. Equally, the EU is bringing in new packaging regulations. We've got a whole host of them in the UK. We're transitioning into them. I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. But the EU legislation will impact your business if you're trying to sell into the EU. So that's legislation that's already, well, not just on the horizon, but almost here. And then you need the horizon scanning to see what's coming, because a lot of this legislation you can't implement, you know, with a click of the fingers. Some of the UK packaging legislation that's coming in has, you know, a lot of companies started years ago, even though it's only really kicking in this year. The next, as I already mentioned, you will have a skills gap. So don't think that you've got to do everything. At Freeze, we've hired net zero consultants to help us set scientifically based initiative targets, because we wanted the gold standard for our net zero targets, and to help us create a net zero plan. In time, we'll transition ourselves off those experts and have the expertise in-house. But certainly as the in-house lawyer, you can't be expected to do that. You'll bring your skills to support the business in that, but unless you're going to slightly retrain and certainly upskill, you're not you can't let the business expect you to just take all of that on. An obvious way where you will be able to really impact and assist is that a successful ESG policy has to be embedded in the business. It has to flow from the top down, otherwise, it's not going to go anywhere. But that means you as the in-house lawyer looking at all the policies, all the terms of reference. If you have, for example, an ethics committee or an ethics policy, you might even be looking at, well, which customers are we going to continue acting for? So Freeths is a B Corp, and there are lots of B Corps who are deciding that there'll be certain businesses they would blacklist and not act for. We're not taking that view, because if you're assisting, one of the less sustainable businesses out there, let's say, in becoming more sustainable, surely that's a good thing. That's our attitude, but that's not the attitude of all B Corps. So you will have to look at all of the policies that you have and see how you can be writing into them the segments that are relevant to your ESG policy, whatever you've decided to call it. I'll talk a bit more about the supply chain in a moment, but that's an obvious area where the in-house lawyers are going to be crucial. You can't complete your sustainability journey. You can't achieve your net zero goals unless you take your suppliers with you. Lots of challenges then, but also don't forget, there's lots and lots of opportunities. You can be improving your sustainability credentials with your customer base, as this says. A lot of the public sector are already choosing who they're going to deal with on the basis of who's the most sustainable, who's got the not just a net zero goal, but a net zero plan that underpins it and that they can evidence and show where they are on that journey. So, there are opportunities to take customers off your competitors if you're further along with this. Natural capital arrangements, if you've got a spare piece of land, you can be creating natural capital, the biodiversity net gain units, etc. You can sell those. That's an additional income stream. And also, I'll talk more about waste in a minute, because I'm an absolute waste anorak and I use any opportunity to talk about waste. But waste is a real opportunity. So don't always look at sustainability as a cost to the business. It can be an opportunity to save money or to make money. Next slide, please. So you can't talk about sustainability without talking about data. And again, this is where you will come in. There's a very famous quote there: you can't change what you can't measure, which apparently is nonsense. But you can't start a sustainability journey without benchmarking. So, for example, I've mentioned at Freeths we want scientifically based initiative net zero goals, and you have to benchmark to show where you are, obviously. Otherwise, how do you know that what you're achieving? It's going to be data, and data is the bane of most sustainability managers' lives, because they can't get it off the suppliers. And we are still, I would say, unless you're a Microsoft and the suppliers just do your bidding, we're still very much in a world where we're getting used to these ideas, but our suppliers are very resistant to give us the information we need, whether it's for benchmarking or whether it's for the next carbon footprint report. Freeths is on its third. You're going to need the data. And that's where you will come in as an in-house lawyer by putting clauses in supplier contracts or in your terms and conditions of purchase to oblige your suppliers to give you the data you need. So one top tip, one of the reasons that suppliers aren't providing the data that is required of them is because every single customer is asking them for data, or a large proportion anyway. And it's data in different formats at different times. So you can make yourselves your supplier's friend by saying to the supplier, sort of start the conversation from the other end, what data are you already providing, and when, and in what format, and then see whether that could satisfy your business's needs. And that will make it a smoother journey. Next slide, please. So talking about supply chain brings me on to the Chancery Lane project. And I'm not going to go into massive detail about this Chancery Lane project on this webinar, because we've done it on previous webinars and we can send you links if you want it. It is so worthwhile checking out their website. They are so cool. So if you don't already know of them, they're a pro bono organisation. UK law firms, but more now international law firms, are contributing clauses and tools to this website, which are free to use. So, earlier we had the Wild West slide, the cowboy on the horse. This is what, all about making stuff up. This is where you go when you don't know where to start and you certainly don't want to make the stuff up. So over 130 law firms have been contributing clauses, Freaks included, and there is anything and everything in there. And now in several languages, there are German clauses, there are Mandarin clauses, as well as lots of English ones. So you may well find that what you need is on there, whether it's shareholder agreements, board minutes, as I mentioned. There's a whole supply chain context. So, one of the great clauses is to do with creating a truly circular economy style product. So if you're in the business of making products, the clause is there, which you would give to your designer in the design contract, which says, please create this product using sustainable resources. You're taking as little out of the planet as practical. Make it last for as long as possible, make it capable of being repaired, make it capable of having a second life. Obviously, I'm just talking about the ideals here. This isn't possible in all circumstances. And then when it's truly at end of life, can it be used as something else? So for example, a car battery, once it's at end of life, can be aggregated into one of those big units and used as an aggregated battery for industry. So, you'd be surprised what things can have a second life. And then at the absolute end of its life, can its component parts be taken apart in a way that they can be recycled rather than just chucked in a landfill? So that clause, I just give that as an example. That clause is there. Next slide, please. So I talk about light green to dark green clauses. I think you've got to be practicable about what's achievable at the moment. I really think that in 10 years' time, we'll be using what I'm about to call dark green clauses too. But at the moment, suppliers are going to laugh at you often if you're trying to get some of this stuff through. So what do I mean? So a light green clause to put into your template terms and conditions of purchase for goods or services might be that they have to sign up to a supplier code of conduct. Freeds has got one of those. And within that code of conduct, you're asking them, if they sell you goods, that they need to be from sustainable sources, capable of repair, perhaps. So that is really sort of the least you can do, but it's a start. It is a start. The next clause, if these were color coded, lighter and then slightly getting darker, would be an obligation to provide the data on reasonable request. Your business needs the data, but as I say, also by way of reminder, why don't you start that conversation with your suppliers by saying, what are you already doing for your other customers? Because there are very few suppliers out there who haven't already been asked to provide data on the goods they're providing or the services they're providing to you. And this is to enable you or your business to report on its scope 3 emissions. Then the next slide along is, oh, sorry, I didn't mean next slide. I meant next, if you can go back to the previous slide, I misspoke there. The obligation to have the same net zero target. So if you've set a net zero target for 2040, you need your suppliers to be on the same journey. Sorry, I cringe when I use the word journey, but, and it needs to be more than a target. You need to interrogate that target and say, well, can I see your net zero plan? So in terms of the documents you might append to the agreement, that would be one of the things that you'd ask them to append. Where's their net zero plan? How are they evidencing that they are going to achieve net zero at the same time as you? Because you can't do it without your suppliers because of the impact on your scope 3 emissions. So again, getting darker. And these clauses are on the Chancery Lane Bank, but I haven't seen a benchmarking clause included yet. The right of the customer to conduct sustainability benchmarking. So in the same way that you might put in a benchmarking clause to do with price, you will have sustainability. I mean, I'm sure in 5 or at least 10 years' time, we will have sustainability benchmarking clauses. And that enables you, if you're in a long-term contract, say it's a 10-year agreement, that if in 5 years you sense check it and you find that this supplier isn't the most sustainable choice and isn't going to be the one that enables you to fulfill your targets, then you can dump them and go with somebody better. But, on a practical level, we've got to be practical. If I was to suggest to the majority of my clients right now that they put one of those in, they'd throw their hands up in horror, because the suppliers would just say, no thanks. But things will change. This is the direction of travel. And then finally, and again, not seeing a lot of these, right to customer to terminate on sustainability grounds. So if it transpires that your supplier has said that they're going to achieve net zero by, let's say, 2040, and it becomes clear that there is no way they're going to achieve that, which puts your targets at risk, which puts your business's brand at risk because you're not going to achieve your targets, then you can terminate and go with somebody else. The Chancery Lane clause bank has lots of other clauses in there, for example, use of low emission vehicles. Again, what I'm seeing isn't you today, the supplier, have to fulfill this contract using low emission vehicles, whether that's EV, whether that's hydrogen. What I'm seeing is, say, in a 8-year waste contract, a 16-year waste contract, when the waste collection vehicles are coming up to be changed, which they are about every 8 years, then at that point, the supplier has to ensure that it's using hydrogen or some other form of low emission vehicle. So customers, I would say, are transitioning their suppliers to get them where they need to be. But this really goes to your brand. You know, at Freeth, we're now a B Corp. We're not going to, but if we were to lose that, the impact from a PR perspective would be huge. And your business will have similar worries, because I would bet that the majority of you on your websites have got an ESG policy of sorts. You'll have set a net zero goal of sorts. And if you don't go there, if you don't get there, then your customers are going to question it. Next slide, please. So it's not, as I said at the beginning, a one size fits all in terms of what ESG means to each business. And I had a look at the signups before this webinar and just picked out a few. So food and retail, you've got different, I suppose, for all these different businesses here, and actually there's more of you represented on this webinar, different things that you're going to be worrying about, different places where there are opportunities for you to make a real impact in terms of sustainability and making a difference. WRAP last week came out with a report that says something horrendous like 60% of all potatoes are thrown away. So it was a campaign to push the supermarkets to be enabling us to buy 3 potatoes instead of a bag of 12 potatoes. Same goes with regard to apples and bananas, etc. Food waste is a huge issue, but it's also a massive opportunity. So in London, I know of one of these massive food markets where they measure their waste, they worked out what they were throwing away, so they now put less food on the plate the first time. If you finish your plate, you can take it back and get more. Better for the waistline, but better from food waste. Better for the business. Why do I say that's an opportunity? Because if you're putting less food on the plate, if there's less being thrown away, then there's less that you've got to buy in the first place. Construction, I heard recently that the most sustainable building is one that's already been built. Costing the Earth last week on Radio 4 was talking about how do we use less concrete. Not great for some businesses, but everybody's looking at sustainable concrete, green concrete, lots that can be done. What can be reused on site? Lots of cost savings. You know, if you're reducing your waste in the first place, lots of cost savings. I won't go into each of these, but you know, the message for this slide is there isn't a one challenge that's true for all businesses unless you talk about data, and that is a challenge for all businesses. Next slide, please. As I said, I'm a waste anorak. I can't not mention the waste hierarchy. Please don't let your business just talk about recycling. The real opportunity for your business in terms of cost saving and being able to shout about it and being able to hit your sustainability goals is if you prevent the waste arising in the first place, you buy less. And then, you know, if that's not a possibility, how can you reuse that waste? So my favorite example is, I think it's the Patagonia backpack company who realized they had lots of little strips of material and said to their staff, their workers, make them into bum bags. And then we're able to sell these bum bags, not at a reduced price, probably at an inflated price, because everyone's unique. So there are lots of opportunities in terms of cost saving and reuse. And only then please move on to recycling. Also a plug for our waste and sustainability regulatory reforms report. Last updated in January. We'll be doing another update in the next quarter or so. There is a lot coming in. If you're one of those businesses that has a packaging team, they should be all over this. I don't know to what extent they're asking you for help. So we've already got plastic packaging tax that's been in for a couple of years. It goes up every year because the idea behind that is to incentivize businesses to reduce how much plastic they're using in their packaging. Incoming are extended producer responsibility for packaging. Already, if you're a business that's affected by this, your packaging teams will have been inputting data, but the fees will be coming in soon as well. Again, the idea is to not about recycling, it's about you putting, using fewer resources in the first place, reduce the amount of waste we create in the first place. And the last one I wanted to specifically mention is the deposit return scheme, which is coming in 2027 for England and Scotland. Which is to do with drinks containers, not glass. So if you're a business that sells single-use drinks containers, and that might affect hotels, it certainly affects the retailers, then there is going to be a cost to that for your business. Worth mentioning as well that Wales is going to have its own DRS scheme, and at the moment, rather than it being a scheme focusing on recycling, which is what the Scotland and England schemes are going to be, they want to focus on reuse. So, make us more like Germany, where people get their bottles of fizzy water reused, take them back to the supermarkets, get them refilled. Now, well, watch this space on that one. Next slide, please. Environmental risk management. This is all to do with compliance. I've mentioned that you need to know what legislation already affects you. You need to have horizon scanners. But you also need to have registers of this information so that you can firstly prove that you're doing what you say you're doing, and you can audit it and you can measure your progression. And this ties in with crisis management plans. So when things go wrong, Iona in a moment is going to talk about greenwashing. So you need to have plans in place. I would also say, we've added global warming as to our risk matrix at Freeze, because, all sorts of businesses are affected in different ways. It might be where you're getting your products from. Are they coming from Southeast Asia? We act for somebody who imports prawns. Is it going to be able to continue doing that? Equally, there are UK firms who are starting to be affected by floods, who never used to be affected by floods. So we've actually, our next in-house lawyers webinar, which I think is in June, is all about environmental risk management, and I would urge you all to attend that one. Next slide, please. 2 last slides from me. I mentioned right at the beginning, the private equity houses, the corporate finance houses are very much focused on this. They all are selling ESG products. They're all doing ESG due diligence, whether they're thinking of investing by way of debt or they are looking to, from the private equity house perspective, if they're selling their shares, they're making sure those businesses look great from an ESG perspective, because that will drive up the value of what they realize. And when they're thinking about investing, when they're coming in, they're definitely doing ESG due diligence to work out whether this is a business worth investing in. And I was talking to one of the corporate finance houses last week and their sustainability director, and she was saying, there was a business that they declined to act for because the directors refused to engage in ESG related conversations and to be on that journey. And they just didn't think that business had a future. So they walked away from it. Next slide, please. Last one from me, and this really does sort of segue into Iona, who, as well as being a greenwashing specialist, is an IP lawyer. Just make sure your business understands that when it is dealing with sustainability and might be coming up with new products, new designs, to continue conducting IP audits to make sure they understand what IP they're creating and what can be protected. So, it may be that your new way of doing something in the factory could be capable of being protected by way of patent, but not if it's become public before you've gone through that process. So yeah, keep an eye on the IP. and make, because the operators, the business might not understanding that's another valuable opportunity that's going to come out of sustainability for them. Thank you. So I'm going to hand over to Iona at that point.
Thank you, Kirsten. As Kirsten said, I am an IP lawyer, but I also do a lot of advertising and marketing, regulatory and advisory work, which is where greenwashing comes in. Because essentially greenwashing is when your marketing team get overexcited and make a claim that doesn't match reality or that can't be substantiated. And it's really easy to get this wrong. And I talk about it quite a lot, but we'll go through a case study in a second, which shows that even the people who really should be doing it right are actually still getting this wrong. This slide is just to say that a claim is a really broad thing. So it's not just something that's on your packaging. It can include imagery, it can include website copy, it can include things that are in your annual reports. So very, very broad. Next slide, please, Jordan. So what's the risk of getting it wrong? The two main risks that we're seeing at the moment, well, first of all, your ad can be banned. And for most people, this isn't a big deal because the ASA, the Advertising Standards Authority, is relatively slow to come to a decision. And by the time it has, your ad probably will have run its course. However, as Kirsten mentioned, the negative PR associated with that can be huge and something that you can really struggle to claw back from. So it's really the reputational damage that is the risk here. Additionally, in the last week, the CMA, the Competition and Markets Authority, has been granted the power to impose fines of up to 10% of global turnover for breaches of consumer law, and that can include greenwashing. I think that the CMA will be imposing fines for greenwashing in the very near future. It is something that's now within its remit, and there's also a political agenda, although Shreya said, obviously, we're seeing that political landscape shift slightly, but in the UK, certainly, I think the CMA will want to be seen to be taking a hard line in relation to greenwashing. And I think we will see fines very soon. So when I go through the case study, I'll say, lucky them that they were caught before the fines came in and not after. There's also risk of consumer action, activism from NGOs and investors, breach of directors' duties. If one of your duties as a director relates to not misleading the public. And obviously, as Kirsten's mentioned, decreased investment, because this is an area that is really important to investors in the UK at the moment. So next slide, please, Jordan. The rules in the UK, I'm not going to go through them in detail because there are lots of them. But we can summarize them quite neatly, and if anyone wants more detail, then I'm really happy to provide that separately. But essentially, we've got the CMA's Green Claims Code, which applies to all commercial practices. The CMA regularly conducts investigations into various sectors. We've got the ASA's CAP code, which applies to all forms of advertising. We've got the CAP code and the BCAP code, which applies to broadcast. The ASA will respond to a single consumer complaint. So if you have one person out there in the UK who says, oh, I'm not sure I like that ad, and complains to the ASA, they will investigate. So the risk of them investigating is actually quite high. And they also are using AI now to proactively look for online ads that might break the rules. So they are proactively looking at the same time. There's also in the EU the proposed Green Claims Directive. I'm not going to go into all of that, as I've said, but it's all a network of pieces that fit together. However, on the next slide, I've sort of summarized where I think we come out. Next slide, please, Jordan. So my view is you need to be transparent and you need to substantiate your claims. And that makes it sound really simple, but it isn't. Because being transparent is a very, sounds really easy, but I'm not sure it is, because of the information you have to provide. And because often I think people think that they are being transparent and that they are being clear, but the message sometimes is obvious to you in your business. It might not be read the same way by a consumer. And similarly, substantiation isn't as easy as it sounds. And the thing I will say here is, you need to hold the data to substantiate the claims you are making. And within that sentence, I mean, when I say you need to hold it, you as a business need to hold it. It's no good saying, oh, my supplier said blah. I don't care. You have to get that data yourself. And it needs to substantiate the claim you are making. As we'll see in the next case study, it's all very well to have some data that says something, but if that thing isn't related specifically to the claim you're making, it's just not enough. So, transparency and substantiation are key here, but it's not always easy to get them right. Next slide, please. So this is the case study I wanted to talk about. It's a relatively recent ASA decision. Ocean Saver, many of you will have heard of, are a company who produce laundry and kitchen cleaning products. They are, environmentally conscious. They are trying to do the right thing. So this isn't a case of someone saying, oh, something's incredibly green when it's not. It's a company that is trying to do the right thing. However, the claims they made, the ASA found weren't substantiated, and I'm going to walk through that now. So the TV ad featured a person using a washing machine, while some computer-generated crabs, you can see in the picture there, sang a song, which I'm not going to sing for you, you'll be relieved to hear, but it included the lyrics, "You switched all your cleaning to be plastic-free without harmful chemicals so you don't harm the sea. Ocean Saver, the ocean will thank you." You can see there some of the claims they made: plastic-free, 0 microplastics, so you don't harm the sea, biodegradable film, fully biodegradable, and they also said over 2 million pieces of plastic and 11,000 litres of harmful chemicals saved from our ocean so far. So the ocean, let me go on to the next slide, Jordan, and I'll take it from there, because what happened was eCover UK and People Against Dirty Holdings Limited, i.e. competitors of Ocean Saver, challenged whether the claims were misleading and could be substantiated. So you do need to take care, not just people complaining, not just the ASA out there with its AI, but also your competitors complaining. So they complained that some of the claims were misleading and wondered if they could be substantiated. And Ocean Saver said, the word plastic is used by lots of brands as a synonym for polymer. Fine. They explained that PVOH, the polymer they were using, could change shape and break down into carbon dioxide and water when consumed by organisms common in water treatment facilities and that had been found in the environment. They said PVOH was exempt from the European microplastics restrictions set out in the Commission regulation because of its water solubility and because it did not produce solid microparticles. And they said, since PVOH doesn't produce microplastics, it does not create plastic waste. Great, they've done their homework. You think they know what they're talking about. However, the ASA said consumers would understand the claims biodegradable film and fully biodegradable to mean that Ocean Saver's laundry pods and the film they were coated in would fully biodegrade through normal use in a washing machine. The ASA looked at the evidence provided by Ocean Saver, which consisted of a couple of journal articles, a book chapter, and a blog post. And they said that that data did not relate to the application of PVOH in laundry, in Ocean Saver's products, or in products with a similar composition. So it goes back to what I was saying. They had some data to substantiate the claims they were making that this polymer would biodegrade, but the evidence did not relate to the way that Ocean Saver was using that polymer, and therefore it wasn't enough. Additionally, one of the articles reviewed showed that different levels of degradation were between 38% and 86%, which means that some of the PVOH was left over, so it wasn't fully biodegradable. The biodegradable the biodegradability report from the manufacturing factory and a statement from the manufacturer showed that between them, the result of 3 different testing methods did not show that the laundry pods were fully biodegradable through normal use. So if you use them in your washing machine, they weren't going to fully biodegrade. And therefore, the ASA said that the claims biodegradable film and fully biodegrade had not been adequately substantiated and were therefore likely to mislead. Now, the ASA went on to look at the claim over 2 million pieces of plastic and 11,000 litres of harmful chemicals saved from our oceans so far. And the ASA said that consumers would think that by buying Ocean Savers products, they were in some way contributing to that effort. I have to say that feels like a fairly reasonable assumption to make. But whilst Ocean Saver had provided information about its unit sales, the ASA hadn't seen any evidence that showed that they had prevented plastic and chemicals from entering the sea, nor that by buying Ocean Saver's products, consumers would contribute to that level of prevention. So it's a really tricky one, because I think Ocean Saver is saying, well, buy our products and, you know, that's 2 million pieces of plastic that aren't being bought and ending up in the ocean. But actually, you can't make that leap and just say that had people not bought your products, 11,000 litres of harmful chemicals would have gone into the ocean. So they couldn't make that claim, and the ad was therefore banned. So the ad got banned. Ocean Saver didn't get fined because the ASA does not have the power to fine. But, you know, this will have been a knock on their reputation, because the newspapers and the press generally did pick up on this and report on it. And they do pick up on greenwashing claims because they absolutely delight in showing when people get it wrong. So next slide, please, Jordan. Thank you. Some common pitfalls that people fall into. Green imagery is one of them. You can think that all the claims that you've made are perfectly substantiated and that you're being transparent, but if actually you've got some green imagery in the background that maybe suggests that what you're saying is a greener thing than it actually is, that can impact. Failure to consider overall impact. We've had quite a few cases in the past, HSBC, Shell, where they could substantiate the claims they were making, but the ASA still held that because the overall impact of the business remained negative to the environment, the ad was misleading. Use of buzzwords, you know, eco, sustainable, what do these things mean, and what do you intend them to mean, and how can you be clear about that? There have been cases in the past where, for example, Tesco sold a vegan burger, which they said was less damaging to the environment than a burger made from beef, and the ASA said, well, it might well be, but also it might not, because it's actually processed and the food miles will be larger. So let's not assume that that is correct. You still need data to substantiate that claim if you're going to make it. Comparative claims that don't compare. This is a really easy one to get wrong. My clients always are saying to me, oh, can I say healthier choices this week, or, you know, greener choices this week? Well, first of all, what does greener mean? And secondly, greener than what? Greener than your choices last week, greener than... It's really not clear. Unilever, who, you know what they're doing in this regard, got stung a few years ago when they said that Persil was kinder to the planet. Kinder than what? Kinder than their last formulation? Kinder than their competitor's product? It wasn't clear. So make sure if you're going to make a comparative claim, it's clear what you are comparing against. And then, of course, failure to substantiate, which we've already talked about, you know, making sure that you've got that data. And it goes back to what Kirsten was saying. It can be really hard to get data. People will tell you in the business, and this happens to my clients all the time, oh, yes, it's fine. So-and-so said it's fine. Oh, so-and-so said, you know, so-and-so said it's fine. Oh, the supplier said it's fine. But trying to get the actual data to double check that can be really hard, but you do need to do it, because if it all goes wrong, that is what the ASA is going to be looking at. Next slide, please. So this is my final slide, some suggestions on what you can do to try and mitigate your greenwashing risk in practice. So stay up to date. Shreya has already plugged our Horizon scanner. It would be worth just getting that and reading up. Getting the topic on your board's agenda. This is not an issue for the most junior person to be dealing with. This is C-suite, and everyone should be on board with making sure that not only whatever environmental changes you're making are heading in the right direction, but also that you are promoting them in the right way. Agree on your business's approach to risk. Now, before last week, I would have said it's up to you if you can withstand an ASA complaint or not. That is your call and the sort of negative publicity that goes with it. I'd say most companies think that 10% of their global turnover in terms of fines is too much of a risk. And therefore, you know, again, this is another reason this topic should be on your board's agenda. But also train your marketing team. We provide training to a lot of marketing teams because it's not fair on them to expect them to understand all of this. If they've got a bit of background and they are trained on it, then they can start to say, okay, these are the things we can say, these are the things we can't say, and these are the things that we will escalate to legal to double check. Collect data to substantiate claims. I mean, I've talked about it already. I can't bang on about it enough. Explain your claims on your website. If you are making a lot of claims and you think, you know, all of this is correct, I can substantiate it, but maybe there's more detail that I can't quite fit on a pack or in an advert, put it on your website. The more information you can get out there, the lower your risk is. Put a process in place so that high-risk claims do make their way to legal, and address any ASA complaints head-on. You wouldn't believe the number of times we get asked by clients to step in once they've already had a go themselves, and actually, had they sent it to us directly, we probably could have resolved it confidentially with the ASA and avoided negative publicity. So, you know, don't stick your head in the sand. Get advice immediately if you get a complaint, because there sometimes are ways of resolving these things. So that's all from me. I am going to hand over to Ben now to wrap up.
Thanks, Iona, and hi everyone. Great to be part of this session. I'll keep it brief, looking at the clock, but my role at Freeth is to oversee our responsible business approach. So ultimately our aim is to look right across the value chain from a governance perspective to ensure that we're operating responsibly and seeking continuing improvement in areas that are material to the firm. So that's where B Corp comes in. I thought it'd be helpful to use the standard as a case study for how in-house lawyers can really make a difference and add value in this area. I'm sure you all know broadly what B Corp's about, so I won't spend too long on the background, but essentially it's a global initiative certifying businesses as a force for good and the ability to balance profit with social and environmental impact. Often associated with environmental issues, which is, of course, a key aspect. But you can see here on the slide, it is a really holistic assessment, considering a business's overall impact on people and planet. So on the next slide, we'll look at Freeth's B Corp journey quickly. So we achieved certification in January 2024. We became the largest UK law firm to be certified. Our assessment highlighted strengths in areas such as ethics, transparency, our people processes, but we know we still have a lot more to do. So we're currently conducting a gap analysis against the new B Corp standard, which we've summarised on the next slide. So we see the new standard, which was launched last week, as a really exciting development for the B Corp movement and a challenge for us that we're keen to meet. And in doing so, hopefully, we'll unlock more opportunities aligned to the standard. So effectively, where previously you had one overall score that would allow for strong performance in some areas and weaker performance in others, the new standard has mandatory requirements across 7 impact topics. And on the next slide, I'll use these areas to talk about the various ways that in-house lawyers could support the process of certification or recertification for B Corp. So clearly, many of these areas are key for any responsible business, regardless of whether they're looking at B Corp or not. Some of them we've already touched on, so I won't go into detail on all of them. But considering something like stakeholder governance, so B Corp challenges you to formalise a stakeholder governance policy that sets out how you interact with key stakeholders. So clearly, as we've already mentioned, suppliers would be one key group there in terms of looking at codes of conduct and contract clauses. There's also a piece around how to best implement grievance mechanisms for internal and external stakeholders. So thinking about whistleblowing policies and making sure they're aligned with best practice. And things like human rights, clearly, will be relevant in different ways depending on the profile of your business. But clearly, there's a role for lawyers in helping draft human rights policy. So B Corp encourages alignment with the UN guiding principles and OECD guidelines. And obviously, there's some updates coming through this year around the Modern Slavery Act and some updated guidance to be mindful of there when drafting modern slavery statements. At Freeze, we're leveraging our in-house expertise around things like environmental stewardship, so looking at our legal registers aligned to our ISO 14001 environmental management certification, or engaging our real estate team to look at negotiating or reviewing contracts with our landlords, where we really need to enable that collaboration to unlock net zero. Iona's talked about issues related to responsible marketing and communications. So really key, and again, B Corp is challenging businesses to set a clear policy in that area. At Freeze, that's something we're really focused on, both in internal and external communications, because ultimately we want to build trust and engagement by being open about where we are on our journey. D&I, there's lots of areas to collaborate on. Just one really quick thing to pick up there is considering where green initiatives might present challenges from an equality perspective. So, for example, removing printers when neurodivergent employees may rely on printed documents for focus or reduce sensory load. So ensuring there's a balanced approach to sustainability that aligns with the Equality Act is something to reflect on. As well as, of course, ensuring that employee data is collected in a GDPR compliant way through data protection impact assessments. But there's lots of really exciting opportunities as well. So to use legal skills in our communities, to engage with charities that may need legal support in an incredibly challenging environment. We've talked about, sort of risk management and enterprise risk management, where legal colleagues can add so much value in terms of that horizon scanning for what's coming down the line and ultimately help build a more resilient business. So that's probably just scratching the surface in terms of how in-house lawyers can really help and drive value in this area. I'd say in closing, it is of course partly about minimizing negative impact and building organization resilience, but also the opportunity to make a really positive difference in these areas and in turn drive more value for the business. So lots to go at.
Thank you, Ben. We're over time, which is shocking. But so I'm just going to pick up one of the questions that was asked, because I think it sort of sums things up nicely, which is how do you encourage a UK business to take ESG seriously? I think it's all to do about money. I mean, it's lovely if everybody's doing the right thing for the sake of doing the right thing. But at the end of the day, we all work for businesses. So if you can show them how they can save money or how they can make money, short term, medium term and long term, I think you'll get good engagement. Certainly that's what we're finding. I just want to say thank you to everybody for joining. There will be a recording after this webinar, which can be circulated. And if you had any questions, because we haven't had time to deal with questions properly, please do send them through and we'll answer them individually. Shred, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, that's all good for me. Thanks, Kirsten.
Right. In that case, I'll say thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of Monday. Bye.